Alright, looks good. So, welcome everyone to another live stream lesson. And I'm keeping with the theme of tactical motifs based on the viewer requests from recently. And this time we're going to do one that's actually a mixture of an opening trap and a tactical motif. The reason I consider it not just an opening trap, but also a tactical motif is, while the thing that we're going to look at today does occur specifically in one opening quite often, it can happen in other openings in different kinds of positions. So I think it's a generally applicable tactical idea. It's a little bit sophisticated, but it's also very possible to steer for this kind of tactic in your games. So we'll see that. And it's called the Siberian Trap. Don't ask me why, but let's see an example. This one comes from the Smith-Morra Gambit, which is very popular. So this move hints that it might be a Smith-Morra Gambit. For example, it could actually avoid becoming Smith-Morra Gambit, which is what we have after c3. If, for instance, white plays like knight f3, we guard with knight c6, and they take it. So there are some situations like that. Although black has other ways to resist, such as e5. You know, if we take this one, then here's a tactic. Simple double attack, so that's a pretty common pattern. So usually when people play c3, it's going to go down the Smith-Morra avenues, although there is a way to avoid the Smith-Morra and transpose to an alapin with a move like knight f6. So let's suppose that black accepts this gambit. And we play a few normal developing moves. e6 is often a good move against the Smith-Morra because in the Smith-Morra, white basically always will play the same moves. They'll always play, once they've sacrificed the pawn, they'll play knight f3, knight c3. So we got these. Bishop c4, castle, queen e2, and rook d1. Almost always, and almost always in that order as well. And as for the dark squared bishop, we will decide where to put the dark squared bishop later on, depending on what black plays. Frequently, we want the bishop on g5, and we're just waiting for a good opportunity to go there. But in some situations, it makes sense to go to f4, so that you can take over the weakened d6 square. So these are some typical developing ideas for white. And since white pretty much always does the same thing, I think that this tactical blow, the Siberian Trap, which occurs with the black pieces, is actually very achievable, at least at some level. So we start with queen c7, which is also a normal move. And let's say that white castles, that normal move that we were talking about. Knight f6, another very normal move. Black really would like to castle quickly. I think that black is better if they can castle rapidly here. For instance, what's an example of this opening maybe going horribly wrong? Let's say queen e2, and then maybe bishop to, let's say c5. Let's just pretend. This is just to show how if white does not play actively enough, then black is just much better. So let's say they play the normal move, rook d1. And we castle. At this point, a lot of white's initiative has already evaporated. They might have to play for instance, getting a piece on the d6 square to try to blockade the center, but they're going to be down material forever. But they still have some ideas like playing e5, so it's not like everything's lost. But it's really much preferable for white to prevent black from castling entirely, as is true in most gambits. But anyway, this is all not the tactical thing. The tactical thing starts with knight g4. So if you're watching the recording for this later on, you might want to pause the video here and see if you can figure out what it is that black is actually up to. Why are they playing knight g4? Does this move make any sense? So one of the things that's sort of evident is that the queen and the knight are ganging up on h2, which is a weak point. But it looks perfectly defensible, right? Like, the knight on f3 is doing a good job defending the king. And after all, the knight's not stable on g4. We could just play h3 and get rid of it, right? Seems pretty normal, seems pretty natural. So let's see what happens if they play h3. And this has happened in Grandmaster games before. I'm pretty confident that one of the chess streamers who's really popular, I always get them mixed up. I think Eric Rosen has talked about this same Siberian Trap. So he's probably talked about how there are some Grandmaster games where Grandmaster blunders in this position by playing h3. One thing he might not have mentioned, I don't remember if he's gone over this or not, is that not only have Grandmasters blundered into this position with h3, but their opponents have missed the winning move as well. So this is a sort of funny moment. So it's basically just a candidate moves exercise. We know what's good about black's position. They have this pressure on the h2 square. It could win the game if you can make it so that you don't have to retreat that knight. So you could pause here, or if you're live in the chat, you could shout out the moves. What should black play here to win the game? So if you guess the move knight d4, you are 100% correct. I have one game here in the live chess database that I cited with some players who I don't really know, where white just resigned on the spot here. And it's sort of apparent why that's the case. Because if they play, for instance, knight takes d4, then there's mate. So we don't want that. If they play any move which is trying to block the checkmate somehow, like this, then they lose the queen. That's a really big material deficit to have to cope with. You know, not even getting a knight for it. It's really nothing. Like one knight, nothing else. So, so this is actually a sort of devious trap for some reason. I think it's just people who are unfamiliar with the tactical motif, or who are not like generally that sharp in any way, they'll often stumble into this moment where knight d4 is a big threat. It looks like knight d4 is impossible until you look a little further. Also, I have a game again in the light chess database, and there are more in other databases where Pol against Elvest. Elvest is like an actual good, strong player, right, that we know about. Pol, I don't really know, but Elvest, you know, that's a household name in chess, right? In 2007 in the U.S. Masters, he played this move knight e5 instead of finding the winning move. So even a really strong player can miss this one for some reason. It's sort of interesting to me how this tactical motif, while it's very simple in that there's a simple checkmate threat, it's pretty obvious what's going on here. They can just miss things like this. The best move is probably something like g3. But even after g3, it's probably not a very happy time. There's also knight b5, so we'll get into that. So let's say first that you play g3, just so you guys understand a little about how to play the position if the trap doesn't work. It's good to know this tactical motif, but if it's defensible, the question still remains, like, should we go for it? And that's case specific, which is why I have a whole live stream about it. So how do we continue after g3? Well, we still see that there's a weakness on h2, but it's covered up for now. That's not really happening. Additionally, they might have some bishop f4 ideas coming up. So probably how we play this position is open to interpretation, if I had to guess. For instance, maybe you don't like the move knight b5. You don't want to see it. So you can play a6. Just to, you know, keep things normal and maybe play like Elvis did. For instance, now if they play h3, you could go on e5. You know, very safe, very snug, no problems here. Even bishop f4 is not a problem. You can resolve this tactically. So if you want, you can pause the replay and figure it out. What should we do here? We could play a normal move like d6, but that blocks in the bishop, so I'm not like a huge fan. If you want to really just get rid of it, you can take this with check, and then move your queen, or play bishop d6. Bishop d6 is sort of enticing because we can get even more pieces off the board, and often for black in the Sicilian, that makes a lot of sense. And this would be a losing move if knight b5 was possible, so this shows the value of the move a6. But a6 is also not very aggressive. They could, you know, not play h3, and then we have to reckon with that as well. So another idea that comes to my mind is to play h5, and this is a slightly more aggressive way of playing this position. And your idea is more or less to just break through and keep attacking h2. And I think this idea deserves some kind of respect because it's thematic. It makes a lot of sense logically. The downside of h5 is that it doesn't develop a piece, and it also weakens the g5 square. But with h4 coming next, it seems that white is going to have to prevent h4 somehow, and their ways of preventing are not very appealing. They could put their knight on h4, which would allow knight d4 in some kind of universe, or maybe bishop e7 to take the knight on h4, so that could get kind of awkward. You could play pawn h4. I think this is probably the best one. But this again can run into some like bishop e7 and then g5 eventually, because now the king is pretty weak in general. Here's an example of a complete dumpster fire. Let's say that black plays bishop e7, and let's actually add another reasonable move here. Let's say that's a6 threatening to play b5, and maybe white will try to put their bishop on a good square. It's actually hard to pick a good square, because if we go to g5, there's f6, and you have to go somewhere else anyway, and g5 break is happening. If you go here, then there's bishop d6. This looks probably the most reasonable, so let's stick with this one. So they could trade and then activate their rook, maybe, just as an example. Now let's say that they get the idea to move and trade this knight. This would allow us to play a move like this one. And then try to find a way to break open white's king. I didn't plan this out ahead of time, so I haven't like gotten this engine approved or anything, but I think that there is a good move here for black for attacking. The move that I'm thinking of is g5, with the idea of just opening the h file, like takes, h4, And there could be some attacking going on here. The main idea that I actually wanted to show for this line, not just for that moment there, is how after, let's say I played queen b6 instead, and they do something similar. Maybe they'll play rook d1, and we'll play bishop e7. And they play a move like knight g5. Actually, no, let's say knight d2. It's actually a little bit difficult to arrange the idea that I was trying to show. Bishop f4 actually stops it. So let's pretend they play bishop d2, something more simple. And then like rook d1. Here, let's say we go here. And now they play a move like this is all getting a little contrived, but I do want to show this tactical idea that after something like knight d2, we can play bishop takes h4. So the pawn on h4 itself can become vulnerable even without a g5 break, is kind of what I was getting at. Z Plasma, hello, welcome. But all these little variations that I just showed, they're a little bit contrived. I had an idea, and it ended up being hard to actually demonstrate it. But the main thing here is that after knight g4, h3, they're getting toasted with knight d4. That's the main trapping idea here. And with g3, they can play h5, as well as normal moves. And the interesting option here for white is probably knight b5. And I want to show something here as well. So queen b8 maintains the same threat. Obviously, we can't go for knight d4 right away because the knight is guarding it. So this is why knight b5 makes any sense at all. You might be wondering, why doesn't black prevent knight b5 in the first place before they go for knight g4? Like this. Well, if you do that, this gives them a tempo to control the d4 square, and therefore knight g4 would come with no threat. They can play h3 safely, and there's no funny business here as far as I can tell. So you have to really allow this knight b5 thing to get the Siberian Trap rolling. So queen b8 makes sense. And if you're familiar with this Khan or Taimanov type position that we have with black here, you'll know that the queen is not badly placed on b8. This knight on b5 can't stay, it's going to get kicked away with a6. So even for strategic reasons, queen b8 is fine, as long as no tactical tragedy befalls you right now. So let's say they play h3, and we can talk about some opening trap ideas here as well. Black to play, and let's say we don't want to retreat the knight. Do we have any options here? Again, it's kind of a candidate move search, but I think that in this situation, it's like if you know the idea, then you can find it. Or if your calculation is just like super good. But it's not really like forcing moves like checks, captures, threats. It's, you know, I don't want to move my knight. Are there any moves that are reasonable that don't move the knight? And the answer, in my opinion, is h5. And this actually is the same as the fishing pole trap. I might put a video out about the fishing pole trap, but since it's so well covered on YouTube, I might not. I guess we'll see. But anyway, this is an example of a fishing pole trap. And the reason they call it that probably is because it looks like this rook is going fishing or something, and the knight is some kind of bait, and the reason we're trying to, and you know, maybe they want to eat it, and this is the fish on h3. There's some kind of like weird mixed metaphor about this being a fishing rod. So that's your fishing pole trap. And the idea is that if they bite and they take your tasty worm or whatever it is on your hook, you get to open the H file. And you can already see this is sort of a disaster for white, because obvious moves lose on the spot. For example, obvious move knight d4, queen h2 is mate, and nothing else really even warrants discussion. So maybe the move that they would play here is something like g3, because we saw that as a defense before. Here we can just take on f3. There's nothing wrong with that. Now that the mate threat's gone, we can recover our material, and we still have this open h file for the rest of the game, and that is a strategic win if you want to go for an attack. So this all makes a lot of sense. So for white, they really should not take on g4. They should play some different kind of move, like g3. And at this point, we can play our a6 move, because we don't care if they take on g4. And that's how the cookie crumbles. This is a really interesting opening trap in the Smith-Morra. But it turns out that it doesn't only happen in the Smith-Morra Gambit. So let's see another example. This position's white to play, right? So in the Smith-Morra Gambit, the Siberian Trap exclusively occurs with black. And here we have a position where it's white to play, and they actually have the same tactical motif going on. So if you want, and you're watching the recording, you could pause here and see if you can spot white's best move. And if you're here live in the chat, feel free to shout out the moves. So the similarity to the Siberian Trap is that white has this queen looking at black's king, right? This is the really similar part. And the knight is giving support. So that's the same. The problem with our idea to attack on h7 is that this knight is doing a good job of defending. So we need to find a move which makes it so that defender goes away by force. An example of an incorrect move that people often guess is knight c to e4. But this move's illogical for two reasons. Number one, it blocks your queen, so you are actually interfering with your own threat. The second reason it doesn't make sense is it's not that forcing. If you get an extra move, yeah, you probably win the game. You would take here, they'll probably take with the queen, it doesn't really matter, and then you'd have queen h7, checkmate. But it's slow, right? After knight e4, they could take it, they could even not take it. They could probably, hold on, let's see, do they have a move where they can not take it? They could play g6, although it's pretty passive. I'd probably just take the knight on e4. So that's an incorrect answer. And the correct answer is knight d5. And I got this puzzle on Play Chess a few years ago. And so I don't have the rest of the game. I could probably find it if I wanted to. But I just thought this was an interesting moment where we have the same exact tactical motif, but it clearly arose from a different opening. If I had to guess, this is probably in English or something, which admittedly is a lot like Sicilian sometimes. But the position's of a very concrete nature. This is not like a theoretical position where we're setting up this threat and then playing slowly after that. Because there's this bishop hanging, and this is a tactical position. This was a momentary opportunity that happened out of a completely different type of position. And that's what makes me think that this is a motif, a strategic motif. Okay, now let's see a whole game where the trap, the Siberian Trap, actually features, but from a different opening. MK, welcome to the chat. Thanks for dropping in. I hope you won't hold it against me if I don't hold a simul next week. I've been pretty busy. Okay, this one is, this game is Floor versus Gilg, and the game's 1934. And this is clearly not a Smith-Morra Gambit, right? It's not even e4. And I'm going to spare a lot of the commentary until we come to the part that I think is important for what we're doing today. They could have played a different move besides queen d8, but that's okay. Queen d8 to me looks a little bit passive because you would probably rather get your rook to d8 with pressure on d4, but To each their own. He probably thought that with his bishop getting trapped either way, it doesn't matter. He's not going to pressure d4 that much. Okay, now in this position you can already see the trappings of a Siberian Trap. The white queen is looking at black's king. This is a necessary prerequisite. And there's a knight here that's ready to jump to g5 where it can support the queen to go on h7. So here's a tricky question for you. Should we play knight g5 in this position, or is there another move that makes more sense? The reason I ask is that it's sometimes tempting to just play a sequence of moves that feels familiar and comfortable to you, even if it doesn't match the demands of the position. So it's good to try to evaluate ahead of time if this is the kind of position where you want to do a Siberian Trap, or if it's not like that yet. Just because things are right for white doesn't mean that the conditions are right for black for you to go ahead with this attack. So, again, if you're watching a recording, you could pause here if you want to think about it a little more. But I think that you should not go for a Siberian Trap here, and here's why. If you play knight g5 in this position, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Let's say they play h6. You don't have the follow-up move that's necessary to go on h7, which is knight d5, because this pawn is in the way. Now, you might be tempted to say, like, well, then I'm never going to get a Siberian Trap. But patience, Padawan. If you wait a little while with a good developing move, the opportunity might arise. So here, I think it's actually very easy to guess a good developing move, so I'm not going to really quiz you guys. But rook fd1, just take the open file. It looks good. You can maybe play bishop e1 after this, or you have other things to do. You can work it out as you want. You could wait another move and see what they do. But in this position, they played e5. So let's reassess the situation. Does it make sense to play knight g5 now? Should we go for it? And if we should go for it, what is black's best defense? I think it's important to know what to do in the event that they don't just blunder and lose. MK is correct. We should go for it. But what is black going to play? So let's say we play knight g5 with a threat, and they just do not blunder. In the game, they actually did blunder and lose. So this guy Gilg fell for Floor's trick. Floor's a really strong player. I don't really know who Gilg was. In the in the annotations that I have here, bishop e6 was suggested as the best move in order to avoid issues arising from knight d5. I wonder if rook d8 is also good. So just for curiosity's sake, I want to look at this one. Perhaps the issue is that f7 is not guarded, that they'll play bishop c4 here. And you have to play bishop e6 anyway, probably, but under worse circumstances. So it makes sense to me that they're suggesting bishop e6. I think this is just like ChessBase's annotation, because I really just copy-pasted the game from there. So this is kind of interesting. They just went ahead and played h6 and fell for this trap. No, not g6. G6 is kind of passive, but I would say that G6 is not as bad as in the first example, although you probably missed the first example. In the first example, black had not castled yet, and they were able to play the h5, h4 attack when white had played g3. So here, h4 and h5 is not as scary because there's no rook on h1. So probably you could get away with this as well and just kind of hang 10, see what happens. But probably bishop e6 is a little more active. You could probably make an argument for either one. Welcome in a circle. Okay, so this was another example of the Siberian Trap, but clearly this is not in the Smith-Morra Gambit where you typically see it. It's just in some random game. So this motif is widely applicable. It's like whenever your opponent has castled kingside and you can bring your queen and your knight to look at this light square. But one of the conditions for its success is that there must be a queen somewhere within striking distance of the knight when it comes to d5. Like if the queen's on e7 or c7 or b6, and the only way that they can save the queen is by taking with the knight, that's how you know this tactic could actually happen. Probably part of why so many strong players have fallen for this is that it's generally not like forced, so they probably don't see it very often in problem sets. If I just had to guess like why people don't find this thing. Here's another example. This one is Johnner versus Tartakower. And we have some kind of weird Sicilian that people played back in 1928. I've actually had this position too, now that I think of it. So I'm just showing the opening so you guys can, you know, share the spice of life. This is not the topic for today. Okay, now here we can already start to see how a Siberian Trap might occur. After the last couple of examples, if you're watching the recording, you might want to pause here and see if you understand why it makes sense that there could be a Siberian Trap here. Just looks like a bad Scandi. I actually like black's position here. Do you mean bad for white? Even without like traps or knowing the outcome of the game, I kind of like this situation. So here, the queen is pressuring h2. We know about that. There's a knight within striking distance of h2. So should we just... Until we know what white does, we shouldn't necessarily just go for knight g4. But white went ahead and played queen e2. So now we can see that things are really brewing. The queen's on e2, and you might remember that we want to, at some point, deflect a knight guarding the h2 square. Now here, we're still like kind of light years away from it being reality, because the knight is not safe if it goes on g4. And we don't have any way of deflecting any pieces that defend the king right now. So this is not a situation where you should just like go crazy to try to set up this threat. I think it makes a lot more sense to play some normal moves for the time being, but with an eye on not ruining this resource for yourself. So what kind of move do you guys think black should play here? We want to like still have the possibility of an attack on h2, but it's not ready yet. So we have to just keep doing other things for now. In a circle said e4, e5. I think you might mean e6 to e5, and then maybe on to e4. That's an interesting possibility, but that looks like trying to force things a little bit to me. Because if you play e5, it helps you to play knight g4, but it sabotages your ability to play queen h2. And if you have to go on to e4, excuse me, that's a big investment of time. It's not clear to me that your position is actually getting better in the meanwhile, in the event that they don't blunder into a queen takes h2 tactic. MK says knight c6 or a6. I just want to remind you that you can only play one move, so tell me which one you want to play and why. MK's on the right track, though. So let's say we play a6, just for sake of argument. After a6, they probably should just trade this bishop. Okay, so Inner Circle likes the idea to play b5 because this could maybe annoy the white forces. But I don't think b5 is really coming. Like, white has so much control of b5. They almost can't control it more than they do. I think the best option is probably to take here on d7. And at this point, I don't know why I would not develop my undeveloped knight with the capture. At this point, things look pretty dry. I think this Siberian Trap is not happening here, but I would still be happy with black because my development is finished. The c-pawn is potentially weak. Maybe b5 could come at some point. Like let's say that you play let's say you play bishop e3, just a normal move. We might see something like rook a c8, and after b3 we could play b5. But it's only under such circumstances as this that we can do that. So we might be more likely to see something like knight c2 to a3 perhaps, or maybe knight to e3, something like that. Don't really want to weaken the dark squares too much. Yittermaster, welcome. So a6 is interesting, but I think we could do better with knight c6, and this is what Tartakower played. So since I've already framed this in terms of this being a Siberian Trap position, it's pretty easy to see that this move keeps those options alive. For instance, if they respond with knight f3, which they did, then things are becoming very Siberian Trap-esque. You know, we can already see how knight g4 is possible soon, things like that. So after knight c6, I wonder if their best option is not to play bishop e3. It's kind of mysterious to me why that's not the move, honestly. Maybe they didn't want to see something like knight e5 here, but even this doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So knight f3 it is. And here, Tartakower waited with one developing move. I'm not sure how significant this move rook e8 is. It might just have been like to see what happens. But the way I see it, knight g4 is already possible. It could be also that he was setting a trap, like trying to enhance his same idea. Because after rook e8, his opponent played bishop g5, which is probably an issue. A better move is probably a move like rook d1, and then maybe we could play bishop g5 after that, or something, and play rook a c1. So I'm really not sure about this move bishop g5, but they went ahead and played it. So maybe Tartakower had some kind of like special knowledge that his opponent would choose this move, which allows knight g4. And since we've already seen this trap, I'm not going to really bully you over it. Hold on, let's see. Yeah, Yittermaster has the idea. It's knight g4, after h3 there's knight d4. Inner Circle has another idea, and I'm not really too sure about it. So we can address that quickly. So if they had played, let me see. It says if bishop takes, knight b5 is annoying. I'm not sure it's really that annoying, honestly. Like, we're trading a lot of pieces here. I could just take it. Yeah, I don't really know if this is that annoying. Additionally, if they take like this, then we could always go this way. Maybe it looks bad, but there are two ways that we can break out the light square bishop. Anyway, so the main thing here is that after knight g4, the bishop is actually very unfortunately placed. I don't think there is a reasonable move here for white, because if you play bishop takes e7, black wins on the spot, and Yeatermaster already said basically what the move is. It's knight d4, deflecting the knight that guards h2. So bishop takes g5 is not working. If we play a move like h3, it's the same. So probably the most logical move is something like this. If they had knight b5, they would be glad, but they don't have knight b5. So after rook fd1, black is still winning. So see if you guys can spot the best move here for black. Feel free to shout it out in the chat. Yeah, well, it doesn't actually matter about g3. Like rook fd1 and g3, I think they have the same kind of issue. No, actually g3 makes more sense. But first, why not rook fd1? We can come to g3. Yeah, bishop takes g5. Not with a question mark. We're not on jeopardy. Bishop takes g5 makes perfect sense because they cannot take back. So we're just a piece up, using the same Siberian Trap threat. So, simple tactic there. Yeah, g3 is probably the best defending move. I'm wondering if black has any kind of ambitious way to play here. Like, it's just it's tempting to just take on g5 and then play like knight g e5 or something. But like maybe f6. Anyway, this is definitely the best move for white. They're just surviving barely. But the reason I said that maybe Tartakower was waiting for white to play bishop g5 is that he was probably thinking something like this, if I had to guess. That like, okay, knight f3 is kind of a weird move. Now I have this resource to play queen h2 at some point. But if I go for knight g4 now, then this position's kind of simple. This is kind of what I was imagining them thinking, that like this is not good enough. So he was thinking like, okay, if I could have this position, see if they play bishop g5, I could at least get them to play g3 and then trade off dark square bishops and claim that this is something that's good for my position. Just a thought. I'm not sure how accurate this thought is, but maybe that's what he was going for here, that he really wants to trade the dark square bishops. So he would be able to use the Siberian Trap threat to accomplish his goals. But the guy just went ahead and lost the game. Bishop takes e7 and then knight d4. It's really funny to me. I have a couple more examples here. And then I'll sign off because I have to go do other stuff soon. But So this one is Sabo versus Kotov, and they played this in 1946, according to my notes. It's funny how this is happening a lot in d4. I don't think that this is totally unexpected, because in the d4 opening, this is probably one of the most common situations in which you get a queen on c2 attacking h7, or vice versa, queen on c7 attacking h2. So I guess it should come as no surprise that it's like somewhat easy to get the Siberian Trap in the d4 opening. And again, I'm just showing the moves for funsies. This is a common thing you'll see. You wait for them to move the bishop, and then you make them move the bishop twice. So far, no sign of Siberian Trap shenanigans. Now here's the first hint. An attack on h7. Now they're going for their own attack, like this, which also has to be respected. Just because it's not a queen doesn't mean it's not a good move. And now here, white played knight g5. So let's flip the script here for a second. So we already know what white is up to. I think it would be dull to talk about that again. How should black respond to knight g5 here? What's the best way? We've already seen that g6 is often unsatisfactory, but if it's the best move, you have to play it. So let's see if we have any options here. How do we deal with knight g5? That's the question, as black. Actually, maybe since this is slightly different, is white actually threatening something here? It is actually slightly different from our previous example, so we should probably start with what is white actually trying to do. Indra, welcome to the chat. So Indra is suggesting bishop a2. I'm guessing that your idea is to play bishop b1 or something. But by the time you get to b1, they'll be able to play g6. There's actually a much more direct threat here from white. I would recommend that you suggest like a small series of moves maybe, so that you can show your idea. If you tell just one move, I have to sort of guess what you're getting at. If black plays bishop takes h2, king takes h2, knight g4 is probably really good for black, so you're sort of on the right track there. But first, let's try to understand like what is even going on. The people playing this game, you know, they're not bad players. Sabo, Kotov, both grandmasters. So knight g5, probably it's not simply running into bishop takes h2 without some kind of complications. So let's think about that a little more. And Aditya, welcome to the chat. Bishop to h2 is a good idea for black, but let's see if it's necessary or what other options we have before we just go for it. All right, Eatermaster has the idea. Right now, black has to defend against the move knight d5. And this is different from the other examples because in this case, knight d5, it can be captured by the pawn. They don't have to play knight takes d5. But the knight is actually moving with a discover attack on f6. So after knight d5, e takes d5, bishop takes f6, now the queen's hanging and h7 is under attack. So white does have a deadly threat here. And therefore we should consider moves like bishop takes h2, which might have been what Indra was getting at, and it's definitely what Aditya was saying. So bishop takes h2 stands out as a good and interesting move. So let's see what happens. Let's pretend that we're doing bishop takes h2. White will probably not take on h2, right? Because after king takes h2, knight g4 check, the queen is able to capture on g5, and there's no mate threat. In fact, white's king is under attack. So probably after bishop takes h2, they'll play king h1. So probably the real important thing to find out here is, if you take on h2 and they play king h1, are you just hanging your bishop because you didn't defend against knight d5? Knight d5 is still on the books after king h1. So let's try to calculate a short line here. Bishop takes h2, king h1. And now it's black to play, and basically just don't lose. You have a bishop hanging on h2, there's a mate threat on h7. How do we stop all of that? Aditya says bishop d5. Black can't play bishop d5. So do you mean bishop e5? Like right here? Yeah, I think you must mean bishop e5. And yeah, that is a pretty nice idea. So if you play bishop e5, I think white can still try to force the position. So let's say it goes back. I'll draw another arrow. I'll try to change the color of the arrow. Alright, so the bishop's coming back to e5. So this one in yellow, this is the move we're not necessarily sure about. What can white do to try to make bishop e5 not work? Indra, your move, queen d7 or queen d6? I'm not sure which one you're suggesting. Oh, you're suggesting after king h1 to play queen d6. Okay, I think I get that. Yeah, queen d6 runs into, I think, knight b5. So you're holding on to your bishop on h2, but you are also allowing white to continue attacking h7. So I'll show that quickly just because I think that's important. So let's say we go here. Oops, I highlighted a bunch of stuff on my screen. And let's say we play this move, which is not in my notes. I think this is a problem. And the reason is that after the simple, obvious move, pawn takes b5, there's bishop takes f6. And you have to reconcile this attack on h7. I think here you can only play... yeah, I think you can only play g6, which is a sad thing to do. Like, you want to take this bishop, but you have to play g6. And then probably bishop takes b5 it just looks better for white. At any rate, there are other resources here, so we can always compare later on. So, and I'll do it from this position so we can practice calculation. Okay, Niedermaster's variation makes a lot of sense. That after bishop e5, white will probably play f4, and he wants to play bishop takes c3, so that white gets the bishop pair, but the attack is strong. So it sounds like black is not defending then, Niedermaster, in your assessment of the position. You're saying that white still has a strong attack after bishop c3. So we could probably do better than that. So after bishop takes c3, also I think you ended with, like, white has to capture back. So you said bishop takes c3, and I'll put that again in yellow. Oops, I just got rid of everything. So we're definitely considering these moves, and the only reason I'm not playing it on the board is to help you practice this as if it were a real game. You'd have to decide all this ahead of time before playing bishop h2. And our tentative move is bishop e5, which runs into f4. Only move I think is bishop c3. They would probably play bishop takes c3 to keep the attack on h7. So is there no good move here, Unitmaster? Your variation ended with bishop c3, and you said white's just better, more or less. We should probably have something else here. Because we did snatch a free pawn, right? We got away with that h-pawn. We gave the bishop pair, but, you know, maybe that's okay. If we don't lose the game, I think we should probably play up a pawn. Also, good suggestions from everyone. I appreciate all the feedback on this diagram. I think that after g6, here I'll show the variation now. Never mind this question mark. This was ChessBase's comment. Bishop takes h2 is actually a good move. Now here, if we play bishop e5, and they play f4, I think this is just complicated. But it's complicated in a way that I think favors black, because they have minimally weakened their king. You know, barely weak. It's fine. They snatched an extra pawn. White had to weaken their position a lot to even get here, like playing f4. I think that's pretty weakening. And they don't have problems to finish their development. They could play like b5 and bishop b7 immediately, I think. Hold on. Takes. Alright, so you actually can't play b5 because of bishop takes b5. But you can play bishop d7. There's nothing wrong with that. So I would play this position with black. I think this is the best defense. With bishop e5. It's worth noting that other moves are worse. So let's say you play knight e5. Now here comes f4. And after knight takes c4, white to play and win. Unitmaster, maybe it'll make more sense to you if you compare it with the other options. So I'll show a few lines here. White to play and win. We've already seen something quite similar to this. It's knight d5 again, with the idea of taking on f6. And this is winning for white. It's not just like good position or something. The bishop on h2 is trapped. They should probably throw bishop f5 to help finish their development. And then now g6 comes with tempo. But then queen h3 is threatening me. So even these kinds of logical moves are failing here because everything is hanging. Yeah, Unitmaster got it. It was knight d5 again. So knight e5 is no good. g6 stops the mate, as we've seen. But now here it's white to play and win. And this is a little bit of a different tactical motif. Obviously, there's no more queen h7 stuff. Here's a hint. Fischer famously lost a game against Boris Spassky by having a bishop stuck on the square h2. So the move here is the same move that Spassky played. Although it's also worth mentioning that in that famous World Championship match, it's not like Fischer just blundered a bishop. He actually had an equal position and didn't manage to handle it properly afterwards. So it's kind of a myth that Fischer just blundered a bishop in a silly way. Aditya and Unitmaster got it at the same time. It's g3. Nice. Trapping that bishop. And now I think white should be basically winning. What happens after knight g4 though? Because this is defending the bishop and our knight's hanging too. We have to see a little bit more. But you know, we've guessed the right move. I think you could play g3 with a clear conscience. Okay, so knight f3. That's probably just fine. Although I wonder, when I see knight f3, what if they play... I wonder if they can counterattack the knight with like queen f6 or something. I think knight f3 should be fine. The only move that looks like maybe troubling here is this one. But I don't really see an issue with, like... Yeah, this should all be fine. Okay. I was just looking at that extra hard because the variation that I had was knight e4 going for an attack. And here they play f5 and then queen c3. But now that I look at it, I think knight f3 is just better. Okay. Now in the game, of course they played h6. They played the worst thing. We have all these interesting variations. And they played the worst thing of all. And we got knight d5 from Sabo. And Kotov played bishop f5 to defend. And then g6. And here we have an interesting moment because a bunch of pieces are hanging. But this is actually a good position to be in for white because you are a piece up and you could at the very least trade queens. So what do you guys prefer? We'll probably wrap up with this example. I'll show the rest of the game for fun, but I think this is the last really puzzly moment. Aditya retracted their message, so I'm not sure about that. There's also no wrong answers here. It's fine if you guys say something which is a little off base. Indra wants to take the queen. And yeah, I think taking the queen is very pragmatic. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, we take the queen, they take our queen, I think they have to. We can take the rook too. You know, it's just a taking spree. We love taking. Maybe to avoid losing the bishop on h2, they would play like bishop e5. Here we can take the pawn that was taking our knight. And we lose this bishop maybe, or maybe we lose this rook. I don't know. Like if they take the rook, I'm going to take on d5, I think. And if they take this, I'll probably go for the open file because I can't really win this pawn. I can go here. And in the end, you know, we are up a rook. So even if this pawn is pretty strong, it's not that strong. So I really like bishop takes e7. But in the game, Sabo played queen takes g6, which was perplexing to me. He has some point, but it's just like too full of art and finesse. Maybe he didn't want to allow black any counterplay from having a passed c-pawn or something like that. Because he's only up in exchange here, and to me that's a little dangerous. I mean, he's up in exchange and a pawn, so it's healthy, it's good. But, you know, I would rather have the whole rook if I could in this particular situation. So the rest of the game was like, you know, Sabo just activating those pieces, fully utilizing the rooks. And Kotov resigned here. It was a pretty egregious error to play h6 here. Maybe he just overcalculated and was thinking like, okay, I have bishop f5 and I have g6, and that's the best way to defend this one. Well, okay, Yettermaster says wait a minute. So what are we waiting a minute for? After rook takes g4, taking the pawn, you mean rook takes g5? And I think you mean knight f5. I think it's it's pretty plain to see why they don't have knight f5, but I'm glad you asked. White to play and win here. Yeah, what's the move? Refutation for your idea. Yeah, rook c takes. And the point is that the king cannot take on f5. They would have to take with the pawn if they want to take back at all. But then that hangs the rook on h5. It's deflecting the defender of the rook on h5. And if they take this one, this gives us a tempo to save our own rook. Okay, so yeah, good spot there at the end. That's an interesting little tactical moment. And I think that that's all I want to show for now. There are plenty of examples of this motif. It's a very achievable kind of attacking idea, although you should, kind of play your cool until the critical moment where it makes sense to go in for knight g5 or knight g4 if you're playing black, because sometimes you don't want your knight on that square. Maybe it's better on f3 or wherever it came from. So you have to really wait until they weaken their position a lot to get that tactical blow in, but do be alert to it. Whenever you have a knight that can go to attack h7 or the opposite for black, and a queen on like c2 attacking the same spot, and they maybe have a queen on e7, this Siberian trap is very likely to appear, at least in the variations, and justify different things that you might want to do with your pieces. So I'll probably sign off here for now, and thanks everyone for showing up live. I look forward to doing another live stream with you. Until next time, take care and good luck with your chess.